The key felt incredibly heavy in the center of my palm, a cold jagged weight that seemed to anchor me to the spot. I stood in the marble-floored lobby of our building, my building to be precise, and watched through the floor-to-ceiling glass as my husband pressed the intercom button for the third time. Jackson Bell, the man I had been married to for 7 years, was hammering on the metal panel with a desperation that was growing by the second. It was that frantic, feverish energy that radiates off a person when reality hasn't quite caught up with the consequences of their actions yet. The intercom panel on the wall right beside me remained silent, blinking a soft red light with every futile press of his finger. I didn't move a muscle. Welcome back to the channel. I share new stories about life, love, and the messy parts in between every single day. If you enjoy these narrations, please hit that subscribe button and like the video. It really helps me out more than you know. Now let's get back to the story, because I promise you this is one you will want to hear through to the very end. From my vantage point behind that flawless pane of impact-resistant glass, I had been watching him for 20 minutes. He had arrived in a yellow taxi, not his Porsche, which was the first sign that he knew the ground was shifting beneath him. He had stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, staring at the empty space in the resident parking zone where his car usually sat. He even raised a hand to his head in that universal gesture of total confusion, running his fingers through his hair. Then he grabbed his duffel bag, that expensive leather weekender I had bought him for our 5th anniversary, and walked toward the entrance with the confidence of a man who could never imagine his foundation collapsing. But now that confidence was showing hairline fractures. His cell phone was pressed tight against his ear. My own phone vibrated for the 7th time in 3 minutes inside my coat pocket against my hip. I pulled it out and looked down at the screen. The name displayed was simply husband. It was not his real name, Jackson, anymore. He didn't deserve a name not to me. I had changed the contact info in my phone this morning while sitting in the plush leather chair of Deborah Collins, my lawyer, immediately after signing the documents that changed absolutely everything. The intercom buzzed again, a long, angry sound that didn't penetrate the lobby but lit up the console. Through the glass I saw Evan Reed, our daytime concierge, my concierge, stepping outside to speak with him. Evan's posture was apologetic, his shoulders hunched slightly, but his hands were raised in a clear defensive motion. It was the universal sign for my hands are tied. He was following my instructions to the letter. I had spoken to him earlier that morning, just as I had spoken to the building management and the security team and everyone else who needed to know the new order of things. I watched Jackson's face transform. It was fascinating to see it happen in real time, even from this distance. The confusion melted away, replaced by something sharper and uglier. His jaw went tight and his shoulders pulled back aggressively. He was shouting something at Evan, gesturing wildly toward the elevators, toward the penthouse he had walked out of 3 days ago, toward the sanctuary he arrogantly assumed he could just return to whenever he felt like it. My phone buzzed again and then again in rapid succession. The messages were coming in like a drumbeat. I didn't need to unlock the screen to know what they said. Where are you? What is going on? Why won't Evan let me in? Call me back right now, Catherine. My mind drifted back to that dinner 6 weeks ago. I could still see the candlelight reflecting off the crystal wine glasses and the way his eyes had sparkled with a sickening kind of excitement as he spoke about her. I remembered the exact pitch of his voice when he said the words that detonated the life I had spent a decade building. I remembered what I found out in the days that followed. The emails, the hidden bank statements, the truth that had been living in my house, sleeping in my bed and eating at my table. I remembered the marriage I had poured everything into. My youth, my trust, my money, and my future. And I remembered the woman who had existed before that dinner, before she knew the truth and before she decided that some betrayals do not deserve forgiveness but rather surgical precision. Jackson was screaming now. I couldn't hear the words through the thick acoustic glass, but I saw his mouth contorting. His free hand chopped through the air in abrupt, violent movements. Evan took a step back, looking uncomfortable, and I made a mental note to give that man a massive Christmas bonus. The other concierge, Connor Morgan, who handled the transition to the night shift, was coming out to support him. They were executing the plan exactly as I had directed. Call security if he gets aggressive. Do not engage in conversation beyond the script. I am sorry, sir, but you are no longer listed as a resident or an authorized guest at this address. I finally turned away from the window and began walking toward the elevator bank. My heels clicked a steady measured rhythm on the polished marble floor, matching the slow deliberate beating of my heart. I felt calm, controlled and icy. Behind me the visual noise of his tantrum faded. My phone continued its desperate vibration against my side, but I ignored it. The elevator doors slid open with a soft melodious chime. I stepped inside the mirrored box and pressed the button for the penthouse. As the heavy doors began to slide shut, I caught one last glimpse of the lobby and the intercom panel still blinking red. The elevator began its smooth silent ascent and I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the cool metal wall. This wasn't the end of the story. This was just the moment where I took back everything he thought he had stolen from me. But to understand how I got here standing in this elevator while my husband was locked out on the street with his life about to crumble in ways he couldn't yet fathom, you have to understand how it all began. You have to understand the dinner, and you have to understand that the woman who walked into that restaurant 6 weeks ago died at that table. The woman in this elevator was someone else entirely, someone he never should have created. I met him on a Tuesday. That detail is important because I have always been suspicious of grandiose romantic beginnings, those cinematic cute moments that people invent in hindsight to polish mundane events into destiny. Our meeting was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at a professional development seminar in downtown Chicago. We both reached for the last decent-looking almond croissant during the coffee break. It was banal and forgettable except for the fact that he smiled at me. It was a slow unfolding smile that transformed his entire face, and he said, "I think the universe is telling us we have the exact same taste in mediocre hotel pastries." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. It wasn't that polite social chuckle you give to strangers to be nice, but a genuine fit of amusement that surprised me. At 31 I had been through enough disappointing dates and bland relationships to develop a thick layer of cynicism around anything that smelled like romance. But something about his self-deprecation, something about the way he immediately broke the croissant in half and offered me the bigger piece made me think that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. We talked for the rest of the break, ignoring the bad coffee. Then we skipped the next session entirely and kept talking at a coffee shop around the corner. Then coffee turned into dinner at a quiet Italian place. Then he walked me to my car, and somewhere between the parking garage elevator and my sedan he asked for my number with an endearing nervousness that seemed so at odds with his confident exterior. "I know we just met," he said, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. "But I have a feeling that if I let you drive away right now without a way to contact you, I am going to be kicking myself for the next month." I gave him my number. That was 8 years ago. I am telling you this because you need to understand that I loved him deeply and completely. I loved him with that total vulnerability that only comes when you decide that a person is safe, when you look at someone and think, yes, I choose you and I trust you with the most fragile parts of myself. Our romance developed gradually, like a photograph coming into focus. He was a consultant at a mid-sized marketing firm, ambitious and incredibly charming. He was the kind of man who remembered small details about your day and sent you articles he thought you would find interesting. I was a real estate attorney, practical and cautious. I was someone who read every contract twice and never made impulsive decisions except when it came to him. When he proposed 10 months later on a random Sunday morning while we were making pancakes, still wearing our pajamas and without a ring, he just suddenly set the spatula down and said, "I don't want to wait anymore, marry me." I said yes. I said it before my brain could even process the logistics. We got married 4 months later in a modest ceremony that felt perfect because it was ours. His family flew in from the West Coast. My mother cried tears of joy, and everything was exactly as it should be. The cracks came later. All cracks come eventually, but first there were 3 good years. Maybe 4 if I am being generous with my memories. We bought a small condo together in the city. I made partner at my firm. He got a promotion. We talked about children in that vague someday way that couples do when they are still enjoying just being a duo. We traveled to Barcelona and Tokyo and took a road trip through Ireland where it rained every single day and we just laughed about it. We fought sure, but I thought we were building something. I didn't realize that I was the only one holding the blueprints. The money came into my life when I was 36. It was an inheritance from my fathers and a woman I barely knew but who had apparently followed my career with quiet pride from a distance. She left me everything. Her estate, her investment portfolio, and her properties. It was substantial, life-changing money. It was the kind of wealth that shifts your entire paradigm of what is possible. After taxes and liquidation, it came to just over $3 million. I remember sitting in the estate attorney's office staring at the document, feeling like I was looking at a number from someone else's life. Jackson came with me. He held my hand during the reading of the will, stroking my back when I unexpectedly started crying, not from grief but from the overwhelming strangeness of it all. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked me that evening. We were sitting on our small balcony digesting the news. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Invest most of it, I guess. Maybe we can finally buy a real house. Something that is actually ours, not just a condo with paper-thin walls." His eyes lit up in the twilight. "A house," he repeated softly. "A home," I corrected. "For us. For our future." We made love that night with a tenderness that felt like a renewal, as if we were reconnecting with something we had let slip away. In the afterglow, with his arm heavy around me, he whispered into my hair, "We are going to build something amazing, Catherine. I can feel it." I believed him. God help me, I believed him. But I was cautious with the money. Caution was in my nature, and my professional life as a lawyer had taught me to be prudent with assets. I consulted financial advisors, tax attorneys, and investment experts. I set up trusts and separate accounts, structuring everything carefully to maximize growth and minimize risk. The house came first. We found it together. It was a beautiful detached colonial with 4 bedrooms in a leafy suburb with excellent schools, even though we still didn't have kids. It had hardwood floors, a chef's kitchen with a massive island, and a backyard with ancient oak trees. It was perfect. I bought it in my name. Not because I distrusted him, not consciously anyway, but because the money was mine. I was a lawyer and I knew the statistics. I knew that asset protection wasn't about love, it was about being smart. My colleagues all advised the same thing. Keep the inheritance separate, Catherine. Do not commingle the funds. It is not romantic, but it is practical. At the time, Jackson didn't seem to mind. "Whatever you want," he said, signing the documents that acknowledged he had no claim to the property. "It is your money." "I get it." We moved in on a Saturday in May. I remember because the lilacs in the front yard were blooming and their sweet heavy scent filled every room. We aired out the house, danced in the empty living room, ordered takeout pizza, and sat on the kitchen floor eating from the boxes. We christened the master bedroom before we had even assembled the bed frame. It was our house, our future, the foundation of everything we were building together. I renovated it carefully over the next year. I updated the bathrooms, refinished the floors, and modernized the kitchen. I used my inheritance for all of it and kept a meticulous ledger. My money, my investment. Jackson contributed to the monthly utilities, the groceries, and the daily living expenses. But the house, the physical structure, belonged to me. I thought I was being smart. I didn't realize I was building my own lifeboat. His career stagnated for a while around that time. It didn't fail exactly, but it gently drifted into a dead end. It was what happens to people who hit their mid-30s and haven't quite made the jump to the executive level. While I was settling into my role as a senior partner and closing high-profile real estate deals, he was still at the same firm doing the same job, watching younger colleagues get promoted past him. A tension started to grow between us, a quiet static that we never named. He began making comments. Little passive-aggressive jabs. "Must be nice to have a cushion," he said once when I mentioned rebalancing my investment portfolio. "Some of us have to actually work for everything we have," he muttered when I used my annual bonus to lease a new car. They were small sharp stings that he delivered with a smile as if they were jokes. But they landed heavy. I told myself he was just stressed, just insecure. He was processing things. I tried to be supportive. I offered to help him with his resume, to use my professional network to introduce him to people who could jumpstart his career. Sometimes he agreed, but other times he bristled with a sudden defensive anger. "I don't need you to save me," he snapped once when I suggested he speak to a headhunter I knew. "I'm not trying to save you," I said, confused and hurt. "I'm trying to help." "It's tea." Same thing, he shot back. I didn't argue. I learned quickly that there were topics that made him feel small, and his career was the biggest one. So I retreated. I gave him space. I focused on my work, and I tried to make our home a place where he could feel successful, valued, and needed. I became very good at making him feel bigger than he was, even if it meant making myself smaller. I did not realize back then that I was actively making myself smaller to fit into the limited space he left for me. Looking back from the other side of the wreckage, I can finally see the pattern taking shape, a slow and subtle architecture of diminishment. It was in the way Jackson withdrew into a sullen silence whenever I landed a major new client, or how his compliments were always laced with heavy caveats. "That is great, honey," he would say with a tight smile, though I am sure half of that success is just being in the right place at the right time. I remember how he used to introduce me at cocktail parties as his lawyer wife, with just enough emphasis on the article to make it sound like a generic category rather than a personal achievement. But at the time I simply refused to see it. Or perhaps I saw it clearly and gaslit myself into believing I was just being too sensitive. I was likely too busy, too focused on climbing the ladder, and too determined to believe in the sanctity of the marriage I had pledged myself to. I did not want to admit that the foundation we were supposedly building together was actually being constructed by me alone, while he stood on the sidelines watching with a growing and resentful envy. The 7-year mark came and went without fanfare. We did not celebrate. We both claimed we were too busy, even though in the early days we would have moved mountains to make time for our anniversary. Jackson started traveling more for business, leaving me alone in the penthouse. I buried myself in a complex commercial real estate acquisition that was devouring 80 hours of my week. We had become two ghosts haunting the same beautiful house, sleeping in the same king-sized bed but living entirely separate existences. I remember one evening when the silence in the kitchen felt heavy enough to choke on. I was eating a salad at the Marble Island with my laptop open, and he was slumped on the sofa scrolling through his phone. "We need a vacation," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Once this deal closes, just the two of us. Maybe that little inn in the Berkshires we are always talking about." "Sure," Jackson said without even looking up from his screen. "Sounds good." We never booked it. And then came the dinner invitation that would eventually detonate everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and the life I had so carefully curated. It was an invitation I almost declined, citing exhaustion, but Jackson insisted. The dinner was being hosted by Grayson and Jacqueline Adams, a power couple Jackson knew from the early days of his career. Grayson was now a senior vice president at some tech conglomerate with a name entirely in lowercase letters that implied disruption and innovation. Jacqueline worked in high-end PR, the kind of woman who called everyone darling and made you feel simultaneously welcomed and critically assessed. "We absolutely have to go," Jackson had said when the digital invite pinged his phone. "Grayson might have contacts for my new venture, and Jacqueline knows everyone in the city." So I cleared my schedule, pushed a client meeting to the following morning, and donned my armor of silk and politeness. The restaurant was in Tribeca, tucked away in a converted warehouse space. It was all exposed brickwork and Edison bulbs, channeling that industrial chic aesthetic that costs a fortune to look unfinished. We were ushered into a private dining room in the back where a long table was set for 12. Candles flickered in the center and crystal glasses caught the amber light. It was beautiful, with that calculated beauty inherent in expensive things. The other guests were already engaged in the preamble of small talk, holding craft cocktails and performing the social dance of professionals at a networking event disguised as a friendly gathering. I recognized a few faces from Jackson's industry and some I had met at previous galas. And then I saw her. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window laughing at something Grayson was saying. Even before Jackson's entire body went rigid beside me, I knew. I understood. It is like the way you sometimes know a storm is coming before the first drop of rain falls, a primitive instinct that seeps into your bones and bypasses rational thought. It was Genevieve Stewart. The ex-girlfriend. The one who came before me. The relationship that, according to the sparse details Jackson had shared at the beginning of our courtship, had ended because the timing was wrong and they wanted different things. Ancient history, I told myself. Everyone has ex-partners. It meant nothing except that the way he was looking at her right now meant absolutely everything. His hand on the small of my back froze. It did not pull away, but it simply stopped functioning as a gesture of affection, as if all the electricity in his body had suddenly been rerouted elsewhere. I felt it physically. The shift. The sudden absence of his attention, even though he was physically standing right next to me. "You did not mention she would be here," I said, my voice low and controlled. I did not know his voice sounded strange, tight and higher than usual. Jacqueline floated toward us in a cloud of expensive perfume and air kisses, pulling us further into the room to make introductions. "You remember Genevieve, do you not?" she said to Jackson with that casual cruelty women like Jacqueline specialize in. "She has just moved back to New York. Isn't that wonderful? It is like a reunion." "Wonderful," I repeated, fixing my professional smile on my face like a mask. Genevieve turned toward us, and I saw her clearly for the first time. She was beautiful, but not in the polished way magazines teach us to recognize. It was a more unsettling beauty. She had an almost ethereal quality, with pale skin and dark, intense eyes, and a stillness that demanded attention. Her dress was simple black and understated, which somehow made every other woman in the room look like they were trying too hard. "Hello," she said. Her voice was deep and slightly raspy. "You must be the wife. I have heard wonderful things about you." "All lies, I am sure," I said with a lightness I did not feel. She laughed softly. "From my husband, no, never." We moved to the table. The universe, or perhaps Jacqueline's sadistic seating chart, had placed Genevieve directly across from us, slightly to the left of Jackson. It was a perfect line of sight. I sat to his right. I watched him unfold his napkin with exaggerated concentration, as if it were a complex engineering problem. The first course was served. A delicate crudo that looked too pretty to eat. The conversation flowed around the table, that specific blend of professional posturing and personal anecdotes that defines these dinners. I participated when appropriate, asking the right questions and laughing at the right beats, but I was hyper-aware of my husband beside me. He was different. He was vibrant in a way I had not seen in months, maybe years. He was witty and charming, leaning forward when he spoke, his eyes sparkling with a dark energy. He was the man I had met 8 years ago at that conference, the one who had made me laugh over a stale croissant. But all that energy was being directed across the table like a laser beam. "So Genevieve," Grayson said, cutting through the chatter, "tell everyone about your new project. It is incredibly fascinating." She waved a hand modestly, but eventually allowed herself to be persuaded. She described her work in sustainable architecture, designing eco-friendly housing for developing nations. It was impressive and sickeningly sincere. She spoke with passion and intelligence, and I noticed the entire room pivoting toward her gravity. "That is incredible," Jackson said. There was an undertone in his voice I could not immediately identify. Pride. Admiration. Longing. "It is meaningful work," Genevieve said, looking directly at him. "I learned a long time ago that life is too short to do things that do not matter. You taught me that, actually." The table let out a collective appreciative murmur. I took a large swallow of my wine. The dinner progressed. New courses arrived. Wine flowed freely and stealthily. I watched my husband fall in love with his ex-girlfriend in real time, sitting right there beside his lawful wife. It was not explicit. He did not touch her and he did not completely ignore me, but there was an energy between them, a current that anyone paying attention could have felt. They had inside jokes and shared references, a shorthand that only exists after intimate history. "Do you remember that time in Italy?" Genevieve said at one point, laughing. "With the Vespa accident." Jackson actually threw his head back and laughed. It was an expression of full-body joy I had almost forgotten he was capable of. "Oh God," I had repressed that, he said, wiping his eyes. The trauma was too great. Everyone was amused, begging for the story, which they proceeded to tell in tandem, finishing each other's sentences. It was a perfectly choreographed duet of shared memory. It was a funny story. I laughed along with everyone else. I did not know they had been to Italy together. He had never mentioned it. But why would he? It was before me. Ancient history. Only it did not feel ancient, not the way he was looking at her. The main course arrived. A perfectly cooked filet mignon that tasted like ash in my mouth. The conversation fractured into smaller groups. Jacqueline was talking to me about a charity gala she was organizing, and I answered on autopilot while my ears were tuned like radar to the conversation happening to my left. Jackson was asking Genevieve about her life, where she had been, what she had been doing. "I was abroad for the last 5 years," she said. "South America mostly, then Southeast Asia. I was engaged briefly, but it did not work out." "He was a good man," she said with a small sad smile. "But not the one. I guess I have always had a very specific idea of what I am looking for." Her eyes flickered to Jackson for a millisecond when she said that. It was barely there, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it and he saw it. "Well," Grayson said, raising his glass, "we are glad you are back. The city was dull without you." We all drank to that. My hand was gripping the stem of my wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. My face held an expression of pleasant agreement, while inside something was shifting, a tectonic movement for which I had no words yet. Dessert arrived. The table was loud now. Multiple conversations overlapping. People were loose from the wine and the rich food. I was trapped in a discussion about zoning laws with someone's husband, a conversation I could have had in my sleep. And then I heard it. Jackson's voice, not loud but distinct, cutting through a momentary lull in the surrounding noise. "You know, you have only gotten more beautiful over the years. It is sort of unfair to the rest of us normal mortals." The table chuckled nervously. Someone, I think it was Jacqueline, said something about charm, but I stopped breathing. He was looking at Genevieve when he said it, looking directly at her with an expression of such open admiration, such naked appreciation, that it felt like a physical blow to the chest. Genevieve smiled a slow, knowing smile. "You were always a flatterer, Jackson." "I am serious," he said, and he was. I heard it in the timbre of his voice. "Most people just get older. You have perfected yourself. You have become more you." "Careful," Genevieve said, her eyes dancing. "Your wife might get jealous." Every head at the table turned toward me. The moment stretched out thin and tight like a rubber band about to snap. I felt my face, the smile left over from my previous conversation, now frozen into a rictus mask that no longer fit. Everyone was waiting for me to react. To say something witty or graceful or light-hearted to defuse the tension. Jackson's hand found my knee under the table. A gentle squeeze of reassurance. "It is just a joke, just a compliment among old friends. Do not be the nagging wife. Do not be insecure or jealous or petty." I placed my hand on top of his and squeezed back lightly. Then I looked at Genevieve and said with perfect, terrifying calmness, "Oh, I am confident enough to admit when my husband is telling the truth. You really do look wonderful." More laughter. The tension broke. The moment passed. The conversation moved on and his hand left my knee. The rest of the dinner was a blur of noise and light. We said our goodbyes, promising to meet up soon, which I knew would never happen. I hugged Jacqueline and thanked her for the wonderful evening. I even hugged Genevieve, the two of us embracing briefly while my husband watched. "It was so lovely to finally meet you," she whispered in my ear. He is lucky to have you. The words were correct and the delivery was flawless, but they landed like a threat. We walked to the car in silence. Jackson drove. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, feeling as if I were submerged underwater, everything muffled and distant. "That was nice," he said finally. His voice was casual, too casual. "Good food." I hope it was not weird that Genevieve was there. Should it have been? I asked, keeping my eyes on the glass. No, of course not. Just, ex-partners can be awkward. I turned to look at him. His profile was illuminated intermittently by the street lamps, familiar and yet suddenly like a stranger. "You told her she was beautiful." "What?" "Oh." He shrugged, keeping his eyes on the road. "I was just being polite, Catherine. She has been through a lot." "You said she was more beautiful than she had ever been." "Did I?" He sounded genuinely unsure, and that was somehow worse, that he could say something that had branded itself onto my memory and not even recall the specific phrasing. I was probably just trying to be kind. You know how it is at these events. I knew. I knew about professional courtesy and the social lubricant of meaningless compliments that smoothed over social gatherings. That had not been that. But I also knew that if I pushed now, if I made a scene, I would become the problem. I would be the insecure wife, the jealous woman who could not handle her husband being polite to an old flame. So I said nothing. We drove home in silence. We completed our nightly ritual, brushing teeth and changing into pajamas, moving around each other like satellites in decaying orbit. But as I lay in the dark that night listening to the rhythm of his breathing, I knew. The lockout did not happen that night, but the door had been closed. Jackson fell asleep almost the instant his head hit the pillow. His breathing was deep and rhythmic, a steady cadence that felt like an insult in the heavy silence of our bedroom. I lay there beside him, wide awake until the gray light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains, staring blindly at the ceiling. In the theater of my mind, I replayed the dinner over and over again. I saw his face, the way it had illuminated the moment he saw Genevieve. I saw the light in his eyes when he spoke to her, a spark I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He had looked at her not just as an old friend, but as something precious, something vital. Something fragile that needed protecting. That look shattered something inside me. It created a hollow space in my chest where doubts began to fester. As I lay in the darkness, listening to the man I had built a life with sleep peacefully, those doubts took root and began to grow. Who was this man I had married? What was this life I had so carefully constructed? And why, in the penthouse I had bought, did I suddenly feel like a stranger? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew with a chilling certainty that I would find them. And I knew that whatever I found would change everything. I didn't confront him the next morning, or the morning after that. Instead, I went quiet. I observed. It is terrifying what you notice when you actually stop projecting what you want to see and start looking at what is actually there. It was like twisting the lens of a camera, bringing the blurred edges of our marriage into sharp, painful focus. He was on his phone constantly. He had always been tethered to his device for work, but the quality of his attachment had shifted. It was defensive now. He held it at a slight angle, shielding the screen from my view. He took it everywhere, into the bathroom for long stretches, to the kitchen just to refill a glass of water, even down the hall to check the mail. "Is everything okay?" I asked him one evening, 3 days after the dinner, watching him rise from the sofa for the 4th time in an hour to check a notification. "Yeah, just work stuff," he said. But as he typed, he smiled. It wasn't a stressed, professional grimace. It was a soft, private smile. The smile of someone deeply engrossed in a conversation that brought them joy. Work didn't make Jackson smile like that. Then came the physical changes. He began dressing with a meticulousness that had been absent for years, even on days when he was supposedly working from his home office. I smelled a new cologne on him, something woody and expensive that I definitely hadn't bought him. He developed a sudden, fervent interest in the gym, a habit he had abandoned 2 years ago. "You look good," I told him one morning, and I meant it. He looked energized, vibrant, alive. It should have made me happy. "Thanks," he said, dropping a perfunctory kiss on my cheek as he headed out the door. "Just trying to take better care of myself." For her, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. You are doing this for her. But I didn't know. Not for sure. I have always been a woman who needs evidence. That was the attorney in me. Suspicion is not proof. A gut feeling is not a case. So, I decided to build my case. I began to gather evidence. It started with the small things. I tracked his patterns. Jackson used to be careless with his phone, leaving it on the kitchen island while he showered or on the nightstand while he slept. Now, it was always face down, always locked. He had changed his passcode. I realized it when I tried to use his phone to call my own, which I had misplaced, something I had done 100 times before. "What's your new code?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, masking the tremor in my hands. There was a hesitation. A microsecond of panic in his eyes before he smoothed it over. "Oh, I changed it for security reasons." "Here, what do you need?" He unlocked it himself and handed it to me, then hovered over my shoulder while I dialed my number. The moment I found my phone and ended the call, he snatched his device back. That was when I knew. I didn't know the specifics, but I knew the game had begun. I could have asked him directly. A healthier version of me, in a healthier marriage, would have said, "Jackson, I feel like we're drifting. Something is wrong. Can we talk?" But I was terrified of the answer. Or perhaps I was terrified that he would lie to my face, or worse, that he would tell me the truth before I was strong enough to hear it. So, I did what I do best. I investigated. The phone bill was the easiest thread to pull. We were on a shared family plan, and I was the primary account holder. I logged into the Verizon portal and downloaded the usage records for the last billing cycle. It was a roadmap of betrayal. There were the usual numbers: colleagues, his mother, the takeout place. And then, there was one number that appeared with alarming frequency. It popped up in the evenings, late at night, and during the weekends. Calls lasting 30 minutes, 45 minutes. These calls happened while he was allegedly working in his study, while I was in bed reading, the two of us living separate lives under the same roof. I could have called the number. A part of me wanted to. But I already knew whose voice would answer. Next, I audited our finances. I pulled up the American Express statements. It was a joint account we used for household expenses and daily purchases. I usually handled the bills anyway, so he wouldn't notice me looking. There were charges I didn't recognize. A florist transaction from 3 weeks ago. I hadn't received any flowers. A dinner at a French bistro in Soho on a Tuesday night when he claimed to be at a client dinner in Midtown. A wine bar. A coffee shop in a neighborhood 40 minutes away from our apartment. Taken individually, each charge could be explained away. But together, they painted a picture I was desperate not to see. I sat at my desk in our home office, in the house that my salary paid for, and stared at the spreadsheet I had created. Calls. Texts. I couldn't see the content, but the volume was damning. Expenses. It was a chronology of lies laid out in data points. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. I closed my laptop and sat in the heavy silence of the room. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden light. Everything looked so normal. So beautiful. This home I had curated, this life I had built, it was all just a set design for a play I didn't know I was starring in. The next morning, I called my firm and told them I wasn't coming in. I never called in sick. My assistant sounded genuinely worried. "Catherine, are you all right? Do you need anything sent over?" Just a stomach bug, I lied, my voice steady. I'll be back tomorrow. Jackson had already left for the office. I waited exactly 30 minutes to ensure he wouldn't double back for something he forgot, and then I walked into his study. I felt like a criminal in my own home. In 7 years of marriage, I had never snooped. I never felt the need. Trust was the bedrock of what we had. But foundations crumble. His study was immaculate. Jackson was pedantic about his workspace. The desk was organized, files labeled, books shelved alphabetically. I started with the obvious places: desk drawers, filing cabinets. Nothing incriminating. Just work documents, old tax returns, appliance warranties. Then I checked his briefcase, the leather one he usually took to work but had inexplicably left behind today. In a zippered interior pocket, tucked behind a stack of business cards, I found it. A hotel receipt. It was from last week, the night he said he had a late strategy session with a client. A single night. Check-in at 7 p.m. Check-out at 11 p.m. 4 hours. No mistake. No misunderstanding. 4 hours in a boutique hotel in the meatpacking district, barely 20 minutes from our front door. The thermal paper crinkled in my hand. I smoothed it out on the desk, took a high-resolution photo with my phone, and then placed it back exactly where I found it. I sat in his leather chair and tried to breathe through the pain that felt like it was ripping my chest open. It wasn't shock. Deep down, I had known since the dinner with Genevieve. Maybe even before. A subconscious part of me had registered the shift in him long before my conscious mind was willing to accept it. This was grief. It was the death of the marriage I thought I had. The death of the man I thought I knew. The death of the future I had been working toward. I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry. I set a timer on my phone, just as I would for a brief recess in court. I needed to process the emotion, purge it, so I could return to the work at hand. 10 minutes to fall apart. Then, I had to compartmentalize. When the alarm chirped, I wiped my face, walked to the bathroom, and splashed ice-cold water on my skin. I looked in the mirror. My face stared back, puffy and red, but familiar. I was still there. I was still Catherine Scott. And I was done being the woman who didn't know. I needed more. The receipt proved he had done something, but it didn't give me the details. And I knew from my career that assumptions could be torn apart by a good defense. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. I went back to his study. This time, I was methodical. I checked every book for hidden notes, every folder for misplaced receipts. I found nothing else. Either he was incredibly careful, or the bulk of the affair existed in the digital realm. His laptop sat on the desk, mocking me. It was password protected, a different code than his phone. I tried a few obvious combinations: his birthday, our anniversary, his mother's birthday. Nothing worked. I wasn't a hacker. I couldn't break in without him knowing. But I knew someone who could. I sat on the floor of his study, back against the desk, and pulled up my contacts. I scrolled until I found the name, Dennis Keller. He was a digital forensics specialist I had worked with on a complex corporate fraud case last year. He was discreet, brilliant, and he owed me a favor. I dialed. "Hello?" He answered, sounding surprised. "Catherine? Long time. What's going on?" "I need help, Dennis," I said. "It's personal. And it's confidential." There was a pause, and then his tone shifted, becoming sharp and professional. "What kind of help?" "I need access to someone's digital communications without them knowing. I think my husband is cheating on me. I need proof before I make a move." Another pause, this one longer. "Are we talking legal channels, or strictly informational?" "Informational," I said. "I'm a lawyer, Dennis." I know the statutes. I'm not going to use this in court. But I need to know what I'm up against. I need to know the truth. I heard him exhale slowly. Yeah. I can do that. Do you have physical access to his device? His laptop? Yes, but I don't have the password. You don't need it. I can send you a piece of software. You need to install it via a USB drive. It takes about 10 minutes to execute. Once it's on, it'll mirror everything, emails, iMessages, browser history, keystrokes, to a secure server you can access remotely. He'll never know it's there. My stomach churned. Is this safe? It's a gray area, considering it's a marital asset in your home. Admissible in court? No. Useful for your peace of mind? Absolutely. That's all I need. Send it. Give me an hour. And Catherine? Yes? Don't thank me yet. You might not like what you find. I already don't like it, Dennis. At least this way, I won't be imagining it. The software arrived in my inbox 45 minutes later with precise instructions. Jackson wouldn't be home for hours. I had time. I followed Dennis's steps, my heart hammering against my ribs as the progress bar crawled across the screen. I sat in his chair, violating his privacy in the exact same way he had violated our vows. It felt like justice. It felt like war. When the installation was complete, I wiped the drive, shut down the laptop, and retreated to our bedroom. I lay on top of the duvet, staring at the same spot on the ceiling I had memorized over the last few sleepless nights. I waited. Dennis said it might take a few hours for the data to populate. I had to be patient. Patience had never been my virtue, but in the last week, I had discovered a reservoir of cold, calculated resolve I didn't know I possessed. My phone buzzed. A text from Jackson. *Hey honey. How are you feeling? Do you need me to pick up some soup or ginger ale on my way home? The caring husband. The attentive partner. The hypocrisy made me want to scream. I typed back, feeling much better, actually. See you tonight, And then, I waited for the truth to upload. The first email appeared in my mirrored inbox at 3:47 p.m. I was sitting in the living room, my own laptop open on my lap, pretending to review contracts. In reality, I was refreshing the secure server Dennis had set up every 30 seconds. Files, browser history, and app data began to populate. And then, the emails. The most recent one was from his sent folder. The recipient was a personal Gmail address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my blood run cold. Tonight. I clicked it open. I can't wait to see you. Same place. I'm bringing the wine this time. You just bring yourself. That's all I need. There it was. My husband, flirting with her. I scrolled up to see the thread history. Her replies were there too, sinking in near real time. You're impossible, she had written. Same place, 7:30. And bring that Malbec you wouldn't stop talking about. I want to taste what you were so enthusiastic about. Deal, he replied. Wear the blue dress. Confident, aren't we? She teased. I'll wear what I want. You'll wear the blue dress because you know how much I love you in it, Jackson wrote back. And you love it when I love you in it. I felt bile rise in my throat. I knew that blue dress. I had seen Genevieve wearing it at the dinner. It was the color of the ocean, the color of a bruise. And tonight, my husband was going to meet her, drink Malbec with her, and admire her in it, all while I sat here in the wreckage of our life, watching it happen on a glowing screen. I set the laptop down on the glass coffee table with a terrifying gentleness as if it were a bomb that might detonate at any second. I stood up, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, and walked steadily into the master bathroom. I barely made it to the sink before my stomach violently rejected everything in it. I gripped the cold porcelain until my knuckles turned white, heaving until there was nothing left but bile and a burning throat. When the spasms finally stopped, I rinsed my mouth, splashed ice-cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. Beneath the shock, something else was hardening. I dried my face, took a deep breath that rattled in my chest, and walked back into the living room. I picked up the laptop again. I had to know. I had to see the entire anatomy of the betrayal. I scrolled back, past the recent logistical coordination, moving weeks and then months into the past. The emails stretched back long before the dinner where I first noticed the spark. That dinner hadn't been an introduction. It had been a reunion. According to the timestamps, they had been communicating for at least 3 months. Her first subject line was innocuous enough. "I am back in town. I thought you should know." Jackson's reply had been sent within the hour. "That is the best news I have heard in years. When can I see you?" I read every single line, watching their affair unfold in reverse, deconstructing the collapse of my marriage one keystroke at a time. It started with casual plans that maintained a veneer of plausible deniability. Just coffee as friends. Great catching up. We must do this again. And then, the shift. The tone changed, the messages grew longer, more personal, more exposing. He complained about feeling stagnant in his career, unappreciated at home. He told her he felt invisible. She sympathized perfectly, playing the role of the nurturing muse, reminding him of who he used to be. "You were always destined for bigger things, Jackson," she wrote. "I don't think she sees you the way I do. Catherine sees a paycheck and a second name on a tax return." His response made me stop breathing for a moment. "You see me." I had to stop reading. I put the computer aside and walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling so badly I could hear the glass carafe clinking against the tumbler as I poured water. She sees a paycheck. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of building a life, of supporting him through 2 failed startups, of holding him when his mother died, of celebrating every minor victory. And that was what I was reduced to. A paycheck. I drank the water in one long gulp, poured another, and forced air into my lungs. I marched back to the sofa. I wasn't done. The messages became more intimate, filled with longing and a sexual tension that leaped off the screen even if it wasn't explicit yet. They spoke about stolen moments, about feeling alive again, about a connection that felt right in a way nothing else did. Then, 3 weeks ago, the hotel receipt I had found was corroborated by an email thread. "I can't do this halfway anymore," Jackson had written. "I need all of you." Her reply was instant. "You have me. You have always had me." I sat there in the silence of our penthouse, letting the knowledge settle into my marrow. My husband had slept with his ex-girlfriend in a hotel in downtown Chicago while I was here, probably working late on a brief, completely oblivious that my marriage had just died of neglect and treason. The spyware was still sinking, and now the text messages began to flood in. Hundreds of them. Banal and destructive all at once, mixed together in a sickening cocktail. "Thinking of you. Last night was everything. I can't wait until we don't have to hide." That last one made me pause. Until we don't have to hide. I clicked on that thread and read backward. 2 weeks ago, Genevieve had asked, "When are you going to tell her?" "I have to handle the logistics first," Jackson replied. "The house is complicated." "The house or your feelings?" "The house is in her name, General, it's her inheritance. If we divorce now, I walk away with nothing. You walk away with you. With us. Isn't that worth more than property?" "Of course. I just need to be smart about this. Let me handle it my way." There it was. In his own words, I saw the truth of who I was to him. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a partner. I was an obstacle. I was a financial complication that needed to be navigated carefully. I thought about the documents he had signed when I bought this place with the money my grandmother left me, the quitclaim deed acknowledging it as my separate property. At the time, I thought I was just being a prudent lawyer. I had no idea how right I was. More messages loaded, filling the screen. I watched them appear with a detached curiosity now, as if I were reading a case file for a client. They weren't just planning an affair, they were planning a future. Genevieve was looking at apartments in Lincoln Park, sending him Zillow links. For when you're free, she wrote. Think of it as our first place. He replied with heart emojis and promises. They discussed trips they wanted to take, the life they would build, how much better they fit together than either of them fit in their current lives. She never really understood me, he typed. I think I've just been pretending for the last few years. Then stop, she urged. Life is too short to be with the wrong person. Soon, he promised. I just have to get everything right. I wondered what getting everything right meant to him. Did he plan to claim spousal support? Did he intend to argue he had contributed to the appreciation of the household assets and deserved a payout? I pulled out my phone and texted my personal attorney, Deborah Collins. Not the one at my firm, but a shark of a divorce lawyer I had referred dozens of high-net-worth clients to over the years. This needed to be personal and absolutely confidential. Deborah. It's Catherine Scott. I need a consult immediately. Personal matter. How fast can you get me in? The response came 3 minutes later. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. My office. Are you okay? I will be. I turned back to the laptop. The software had finished the initial synchronization. I now had access to everything. Every email, every text, every photo, every browser search. I went to his history. I found the search terms he had been typing in late at night. Divorce attorney reviews. How to claim equity in separate property. Alimony laws Illinois when wife earns more. He had been researching, planning, and preparing to leave me while simultaneously calculating how to strip mine my life for resources. And the whole time, he came home, kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, and slept in our bed. I checked the photo folder. There she was. Genevieve. Dozens of photos of them together. Coffee dates, dinners in dimly lit restaurants, candid shots of her laughing in the passenger seat of his car. Him kissing her cheek. Selfies of them in bed, thankfully clothed, but the intimacy was undeniable. The photos were a visual timeline of the last 3 months, a chronology of everything I had been too busy to notice. In one photo, she was wearing a necklace I didn't recognize. A delicate gold pendant, expensive looking. I cross-referenced the date with the credit card statements. There was a purchase at a jeweler on Michigan Avenue for $4,000, 2 weeks ago. I had seen that charge and assumed it was for me, for our upcoming anniversary. Maybe an early birthday gift. It had never been for me. I created a secure folder on an encrypted external drive and began to organize everything. Screenshots of the email threads, the text messages, the photos, the credit card statements, the browser history. I was building a case against my husband with the same meticulous attention to detail I gave to a billion-dollar merger. The proof of infidelity was documented. The proof of financial planning to enrich himself from the divorce was documented. The timeline of deception was locked down. By the time I finished, it was 5:30. Jackson was supposed to be home in an hour, though I knew he wouldn't be. According to his texts, he was meeting Genevieve at 7:30, which meant he would need an excuse. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:15, my phone buzzed on the counter. Stuck at the office with a crisis. Don't wait up for dinner. I love you. I love you. 3 words that had once been the bedrock of my life. Now they were just white noise, a routine sign-off used to conceal a lie. I typed back immediately. No problem. I'm probably going to bed early anyway. Still not feeling 100%. Feel better, honey. I wondered if he felt even a twinge of guilt, or if the lying had become so routine that it was just another item on a checklist. Text wife. Cover tracks. Go to mistress. I had 3 hours before he would arguably come home, maybe 4 depending on how long he stayed with her. I used that time to think. Not about whether to leave him. That decision had been made the second I read that first email. You cannot unknow something like this. You cannot feel this betrayed and keep a marriage alive. The marriage was a corpse, he just didn't know I had signed the death certificate yet. I thought about how to confront him. I could throw the laptop at him when he walked in, scream, cry, demand answers to questions that didn't matter anymore. Or, I could be smart. I was a real estate attorney. I knew property law inside and out. I knew what was mine, what was his, what was protected, and what was vulnerable. In a divorce, the person who plans is the person who wins. He had been planning, researching his rights, working out his strategy while keeping me in the dark. But he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated me. The penthouse was mine, bought with inheritance money, kept in a separate trust. He had signed waivers. No matter how good his lawyer was, he wasn't touching this apartment. Our cars were titled individually. Mine was paid off. His Porsche had 2 years of payments left, payments that came from our joint checking account which I could freeze. Our bank accounts were joint, except for my primary investment portfolio, which was entirely separate. I could withdraw my half of the joint funds, leave him his share, and close the door on our financial entanglement before he even knew what happened. I considered the timing. If I moved too fast without Deborah's guidance, I might make a mistake. But if I waited too long, he might make his move first. Tomorrow morning, I would meet with Deborah, finalize a strategy, and then execute it with surgical precision. But tonight I needed to see it with my own eyes. I knew where they were meeting. The text message had mentioned the place explicitly. A wine bar in the arts district called Obscura. I had never been there. It was probably their spot, a place full of memories I wasn't part of. I could go there. I could watch them. Some would say it was masochistic, that I already had all the proof I needed. But I needed to see the reality of it. I needed to witness the death of my marriage in real time, to sear the image into my brain so that when he inevitably tried to gaslight me, to minimize it, to make me feel crazy for being hurt, I would have this. I would have the image of him with her, living the truth he had hidden. I went to the bedroom and changed. I didn't dress as the version of myself he knew. I stripped off the tailored suit and the persona of the composed, high-powered attorney. I put on dark jeans, a black cashmere sweater, and pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I swapped my contacts for my thick-framed reading glasses. I looked like a different person. I felt like a different person. At 7:15, I got into my sedan, not the luxury SUV we used for family trips, and drove downtown. The city lights blurred past me, streaks of neon and white in the darkness. Obscura was tucked away in a converted warehouse district that had become trendy in the last 5 years. It was exactly the kind of place Jackson would love: exposed ductwork, Edison bulbs, and a curated list of natural wines that cost $20 a glass. I saw the warm glow of the interior spilling out onto the sidewalk through floor-to-ceiling windows. People were crowded around small tables, laughing and talking with that animated energy of a Friday night, full of hope for how the evening might unfold. I drove past slowly and found a spot on the opposite side of the street, 2 blocks down. Far enough to be invisible, close enough to see. I gripped the steering wheel, my leather gloves creaking with the tension. I had expected to be shaking again, expected tears or some physical manifestation of the emotional earthquake happening inside me. But I felt calm. Cold. It was almost as if I had stepped out of my body and was watching this happen to a character in a movie. Maybe this was shock, or maybe this was what I became when the worst-case scenario actually happened. I wasn't the woman who crumbled. I was the woman who observed, documented, and prepared. At 7:28, his car pulled up. The black Porsche Cayenne he had insisted on leasing 3 years ago. I had secretly thought it was a cliché, a midlife crisis on wheels, but I had supported him because it made him happy. He circled the block once looking for parking and finally squeezed into a spot 2 cars ahead of me. I slouched low in my seat, though it wasn't necessary. He wasn't looking for me. I didn't exist in his world right now. His mind was entirely on her, on the evening ahead, on the secret life he was building. He stepped out of the car, and under the amber glow of the street lamp, I watched him check his reflection in the driver's side window. He smoothed his hair, adjusted his collar, and straightened his jacket. He was wearing the blue button-down shirt I had bought him for his birthday last month. The one I told him brought out the gray in his eyes. He was wearing it for her. He walked toward the bar with a confidence that turned my stomach, that easy, arrogant stride of a man walking toward exactly what he wanted. I waited 30 seconds, counting the beats of my heart, and then opened my door. The November air was sharp and bit through my sweater. I had left my coat in the car. Good. The cold helped. It kept me sharp. I walked toward Obscura, staying in the shadows near the building facades. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm against the stillness of my hands. Through the large front window, I spotted him. He had taken a table in the back corner. She wasn't there yet. He was looking at his phone, a small, soft smile playing on his lips. Probably reading a text from her saying she was close. I couldn't go inside. It was too risky. If he saw me, the element of surprise, my greatest tactical advantage, would be gone. But the bar had a side patio that wrapped around the corner of the warehouse. I could see the glow of heat lamps and the outline of wrought iron fencing. The patio was connected to the main room by large, open French doors. If I positioned myself correctly on the sidewalk, looking through the wrought iron, I would have a direct line of sight to his table. I walked around the block to the side street. The patio was sparsely populated, only a few brave souls were huddled under the heaters, determined to enjoy the ambience despite the chill. I moved in. Oh, the darkness between 2 street lamps, finding a vantage point between the heavy velvet curtains and the door frame. I had a clear view. I stood there, a ghost in the dark, and waited for the other woman to arrive. I chose a secluded corner table tucked behind a large potted ficus, offering me enough shadow to remain invisible while maintaining a clear sight line to the entrance. I ordered a glass of Cabernet from a passing server, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I angled my chair just so, creating the perfect vantage point through the glass doors of the Obscura wine bar. It was 7:35 when Genevieve arrived. I spotted her before Jackson did, watching as she paused in the doorway to scan the room. Her face lit up the moment she locked eyes with him. She was wearing the blue dress, the one I knew he had specifically requested she wear, and I had to admit, purely objectively, that she looked beautiful. She possessed that same ethereal quality I had noticed during that disastrous dinner party, now amplified by the warm, amber lighting of the bar and the naked adoration on her face. She walked to his table, and my husband stood up to greet her. They embraced, and it wasn't a friendly hug between acquaintances, it lingered far too long, their bodies pressed together with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. When they finally pulled apart, Jackson let his hands rest on her waist for a moment, gazing down at her with an expression I recognized with a painful jolt. I had seen that look before, many years ago, when I was the one standing in the glow of his affection. They sat down, and a waiter appeared almost instantly, suggesting they were regulars here, faces known to the staff. They ordered without even glancing at the menus. Once the server retreated, they leaned across the small table toward one another, fingers interlaced, talking with the intense urgency of 2 people who have a lifetime of things to say and only stolen hours to say them. I lifted my wine glass and took a sip, but the expensive vintage tasted like vinegar on my tongue. From my position, I had a high-definition view of their affair, yet I couldn't hear a single word. I was forced to read their body language, filling in the silence with my own tortured imagination, which was somehow worse than knowing the truth. Genevieve threw her head back, laughing at something he said, her hand stretching across the wood to graze his knuckles. Jackson turned his palm upward, catching her fingers and holding them tight. It was such a small, intimate gesture, meaningless to anyone else in the restaurant, but absolutely devastating to me. The wine arrived at their table. He had ordered the Malbec he promised her. They raised their glasses for a toast. I couldn't hear the sound, but my mind supplied the delicate chime of crystal against crystal, a promise sealed in red wine. As they drank, I watched his thumb trace lazy, affectionate circles on the back of her hand. He was present with her in a way he hadn't been with me for years, perhaps ever. He was leaning in, engaged, animated, alive. Genevieve said something that made him press a hand to his heart in mock offense, and she laughed even harder. They had inside jokes, a rhythm, a shared history existing in a bubble I could never penetrate, no matter how many emails I read or spyware logs I analyzed. That exclusion hurt more than the physical betrayal. It was the knowledge that he maintained an entire separate life, a separate personality reserved just for her. She got the best parts of Jackson Bell, the charm, the wit, the attention, while I was left with the scraps, the tired, resentful, checked-out version who came home to scroll through his phone and made me feel needy for wanting a conversation. My hand cramped around the stem of my glass, and I forced myself to relax my grip before I shattered the crystal. Their appetizers arrived, small plates meant for sharing. I watched them feed each other with a casual comfort that spoke of routine. The waiter checked on them, and they both beamed up at him with the warmth of people who are exactly where they want to be. Eventually, Genevieve stood up to head to the ladies' room. Jackson watched her walk away, his eyes following her figure through the room with undisguised hunger. The moment she was out of sight, he pulled out his phone. A second later, my own phone buzzed against my hip. I pulled it from my coat pocket and stared at the screen. A message from Jackson. Work crisis is dragging on longer than expected. Probably won't be home until 11. Sorry, honey. I stared at the glowing letters, at the casual lie, the reflexive deception, the apology that meant absolutely nothing. I typed back, my fingers cold and precise. It's fine. Take your time. I looked up to watch him read my reply. A faint, satisfied smile touched his lips as he slid the phone back into his pocket, completely absolved of guilt, just as Genevieve returned to the table. She sat down, and he immediately reached for her hand again, saying something that made her eyes soften. She whispered something back. I'm not a lip reader, but the shape of the words looked undeniably like I love you. The stem of my wine glass seemed to bend under my pressure. I knew I had to leave. I had all the confirmation I needed. Sitting here torturing myself served no purpose other than pouring salt into a fatal wound, yet I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, witnessing the death of my marriage in real time. I watched them finish their meal, watched them order a single dessert with 2 forks, watched them share bites with the involuntary intimacy of lovers. Seeing my husband this happy, I understood something profound as I sat there in the shadows. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment or a midlife crisis or any of the other excuses people use to soften the edges of betrayal. This was a choice. A choice he made over and over again. Every text, every lie, every moment he didn't stop, he was choosing her. And by choosing her, he was actively discarding me. The check came. He paid with our joint American Express card, I noted with bitter irony. Funding his date with my money. They stood to leave, and he helped her into her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders a moment too long. They walked toward the exit, and for a terrifying second, I thought they might pass my table, but they turned toward the main vestibule. I waited a beat, then slipped out, watching through the front window as they walked to his car. He opened the passenger door for her, and she stood on her tiptoes to kiss him before sliding inside. It was a real kiss, not long, but deep and intentional. The kind of kiss shared by people who plan to finish what they started in a hotel room very soon. Another 4 hours he would steal from our life to give to her. His car pulled away from the curb, and I watched the taillights fade around the corner. Only then did I realize my cheeks were wet. I wasn't sobbing, just silent, steady tears leaking out, cooling rapidly in the biting Chicago wind. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, glancing down at my wine glass, still full except for that first sip. I left a pile of cash on the table, far too much for one drink, but I didn't care. I just needed to be gone. The drive home was automatic. I don't remember navigating the city streets or the highway. My body knew the way, muscle memory guiding the wheel through turns and stoplights while my mind processed the finality of what I had seen. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the tears had stopped. As I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silent foyer, I felt a shift. The woman who had driven to the wine bar holding on to a shred of hope, the woman who prayed there was a misunderstanding, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone colder, harder, someone who understood that mercy is wasted on people who have already shown you their true character. I went upstairs, washed my face, and went through the motions of a normal night. I set my alarm for 7 in the morning and climbed into bed. I slept deeply and without dreams for the first time in weeks. When the alarm woke me the next morning, Jackson was still asleep. He must have come in late, creeping into bed without waking me, carrying the faint, cloying scent of Genevieve's perfume on his skin. I rose quietly, showered, and dressed with meticulous care. I chose a sharp, charcoal business suit, the kind I wore for high-stakes negotiations, because in a way, I was going to war. The moving crew arrived promptly at 9 o'clock. 3 large men with boxes, dollies, and an efficient, professional demeanor. I directed them to the study and the master closet. I had already tagged everything that was his with color-coded stickers while he slept. Jackson stumbled into the hallway a few minutes later, blinking against the morning light, looking disheveled and confused in his boxers and t-shirt. "What's going on? Catherine? Are we moving?" "You are moving," I said, my voice calm and level. He stared at me, his brain struggling to catch up. "What? These guys are packing your stuff?" "They are packing your stuff, Jackson. I've rented a storage unit in your name. You'll get the address and access code this afternoon via email." He let out a scoff of disbelief. "This is a joke, right?" He turned to the movers, who professionally ignored him and kept taping boxes. "Hey, hold on a second. Stop. This has to be a mistake." "No mistake," I interjected. "This is my house. I am asking you to leave." His face cycled through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "You can't just kick me out, Catherine. I live here. This is my home. Actually, this house is my separate property, purchased before our marriage. You are not on the deed, and per the prenuptial agreement, you have no claim to it. If you don't believe me, call your lawyer." "What the hell is happening?" His voice rose to a shout. "Did someone say something to you? Is this about work?" "It's about Genevieve," I said softly. The name hit him like a physical blow. "It's about the affair you've been carrying on for 3 months. The hotel visits, the lies, the spyware I found on your laptop, and the plans you were making to divorce me while hiding assets. I know everything, Jackson. The emails, the texts, the credit card statements. Don't insult my intelligence by trying to deny it." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Cat, listen, let me explain." "There is nothing to explain. I have already retained counsel. Deborah Collins filed the petition for divorce this morning. You will be served formally in the next 24 hours. Our finances are already severed. Your things are being packed, and your key will no longer work in these locks." "You changed the locks?" Outrage roared with panic in his voice. "You can't do that." "I already did." He took a threatening step toward me, looming over me, but I didn't flinch. I held up a hand. "Don't. The movers are witnesses. My lawyer has everything documented. If you make this difficult, you are only hurting yourself." "I live here," he repeated, weaker this time, as if the repetition could make it true. "You lived here." Past tense. "Now you need to figure out where you're going to stay tonight." "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, sounding small for the first time. "That is no longer my problem." I pulled a sealed envelope from my pocket. "Here. This is a letter outlining the immediate terms. Read it when you calm down, and get a lawyer. You're going to need a good one." I handed him the paper, turned on my heel, and walked into the master bedroom, my bedroom, closing and locking the door behind me. Through the wood, I heard him making frantic phone calls. First to Genevieve, his voice hushed and urgent. Then, I assumed, to whatever attorney he could find, his tone shifting to desperate pleading. None of it mattered to me anymore. By noon, the movers were gone. His study was empty, his clothes vanished from the closet. The house felt larger, cleaner, as if a heavy, suffocating weight had been lifted from the foundation. I stood at the living room window, watching the truck drive away, carrying the physical remnants of my marriage to a storage facility I would never visit. My phone rang. It was Deborah Collins. "Catherine, the papers are filed," she said, her voice crisp and reassuring. "He'll be served tomorrow." "Thank you, Deborah. How are you holding up?" I looked around my quiet, sunlit living room. My space. My future, no longer entangled with a man who had betrayed me. "I feel good," I said, and realized with a start that I meant it. "I feel free." 6 weeks later, I stood in the marble lobby of my office building, the same place this nightmare had begun, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The divorce had been finalized that morning, fast, surgical, and clean, just as Deborah had promised. Jackson had tried to fight, of course. He hired an attorney who made a lot of noise about his contributions to the household and emotional distress, trying to squeeze out a settlement. But the prenup was ironclad, the house was mine, and my inheritance was untouchable. After 7 years of marriage where our finances had been meticulously kept separate, he walked away with his personal effects, his car, and the remaining lease payments, and half of our meager joint checking account. He left the marriage with exactly what he brought into it, and nothing more. Genevieve had taken him in initially. I heard through the grapevine, mutual friends who had quietly sided with me once the evidence came to light, that they tried to make a go of it. They tried to live out the great romance, finally free to exist in the light. But apparently, a clandestine affair is very different from a relationship. The thrill of secret meetings and stolen moments doesn't translate well to the mundane reality of shared bills, cramped spaces, and the daily grind of a real partnership. They lasted 5 weeks before she asked him to leave. Now, Jackson was living in a studio apartment on the fringes of the city, working the same job, driving the same car, probably wondering how his comfortable life had disintegrated so rapidly. I felt no pity for him. I felt nothing at all. The penthouse was mine. I had turned his old study into a reading room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a velvet armchair by the window. I had repainted the bedroom, replaced the linens, and reclaimed every square inch of my sanctuary. My career was flourishing. Without the emotional drain of a dying marriage, I had energy to burn. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. I turned away from the window and walked toward the elevator, ready to start the rest of my life. In the last month alone, I had secured 2 major clients for the firm, handling complex cases that would have previously kept me up all night with anxiety. Now, I navigated them with a quiet, steady confidence that even surprised me. It was as if a heavy fog had lifted from my brain, freeing up mental space that had been held hostage for far too long. I finally started prioritizing myself again. I began running in the mornings, feeling the cold wind off Lake Michigan wake up my skin as I jogged along the shore. I joined a local book club, drinking wine and laughing with strangers who quickly became friends, and I reached out to old companions I had shamefully neglected during the years I spent trying to patch up a marriage that was already sinking. I was building a life. It certainly wasn't the life I had planned, nor was it the future I had envisioned 8 years ago when I tearfully said yes to Jackson's proposal over breakfast. But this life was different. It was authentic, it was solid, and most importantly, it was entirely mine. Sometimes, late at night when the city was quiet, my mind would drift back to the woman I used to be. I thought of the Catherine who walked into the obscure wine bar, heart pounding, to sit across from her husband while he dined with his mistress. I thought of how she smiled through the agony, constantly comparing herself to Genevieve and feeling completely inadequate. That version of me believed that love meant holding on until your knuckles turned white, that commitment meant enduring disrespect, and that a good wife made herself smaller so her husband could feel like a giant. That woman is gone now. In her place stands someone who understands a fundamental truth that took me too long to learn. The opposite of love isn't hate, it is indifference. I realized that the most powerful thing you can do when someone betrays you is not to scream, or slash tires, or seek dramatic revenge. It is to remove them from your existence with the same careful, surgical precision you would use to remove a tumor. You cut it out completely, finally, and forever. Standing in the lobby of my building, looking out through the glass doors, I saw him. I watched the figure of my ex-husband, Jackson Bell, walking down the sidewalk. His shoulders were slumped forward, his gait heavy and defeated. He looked smaller than I remembered, just a man alone in a big city. I didn't feel a spike of anger, and I didn't feel a pang of longing. I felt absolutely nothing. I turned away from the window, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. As the door slid shut, cutting off the view of the street, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory, though I had certainly won. It was a smile of clarity. I finally understood that the best revenge isn't leaving someone homeless or destitute. It is building a life so fulfilled, so rich, and so vibrant that their absence becomes irrelevant. Jackson thought he could use me as a safety net while he auditioned Genevieve for his future. Instead, he taught me that I never needed him at all. That lesson, as painful as it was to endure, was the key to my freedom. The elevator chimed softly as it reached my floor. I stepped into the hallway and reached into my purse for my key. It was the only copy in existence. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Quiet. Peaceful. Mine. I kicked off my heels, feeling the plush rug under my feet, and poured myself a glass of deep red wine. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there in the dark, Jackson was probably wondering what went wrong, perhaps even spinning a new narrative where he was the victim of a cruel wife. But I had more important things to do than waste another second thinking about a man who had already consumed too many years of my life. I had a life to live, and it was going to be extraordinary. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and letting me share this chapter of my life with you. It truly means the world to me that you're here. If my story resonated with you, please let me know by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel so we can stay connected. I would love to know who is listening, so drop a comment down below telling me what city you are tuning in from and what time it is there. I am always so curious to see how far these stories travel. If you want to support the channel even further, there is a link for donations, but your presence is the greatest gift of all. I'll be back every day with a new story just for you. In the meantime, 2 of my most popular stories are popping up on your screen right now, so go ahead and click one to keep listening.